guys. Forgive me if I do this wrong. I've recorded this so many times. Just wanted to start with the definition of a sexually violent predator. It's an individual who's been convicted of any type of offense that's sexually violent in nature, and they're diagnosed with a mental disorder, one that makes them kind of more likely to do sexually violent behaviors moving forward. Some of the diagnoses from the DSM that I came up with were especially the paraphilias. Not a lot of pedophiles are sexually violent necessarily, but they do have a correlation that I was reading about. Also, antisocial personality disorder, as we know, comes from the conduct disorder. The violence as an adolescent turns into violence as an adult, and if you combine that with sexually violent behavior, it becomes extremely dangerous. Really, any personality disorder could potentially be associated with violence, sexually deviant behavior, depending on such things as their ACEs score when they were younger, any type of exposure to any traumatic event, having been offended upon themselves or gotten away with any type of sexual offenses when they were younger. So any kind of impulse control disorder could potentially also be included in that list. Some of the laws I was reading about in California, there's the Sexually Violent Predators Act in 1996 that came along, kind of decided that people that would be called an SVP would be like an individual that was already convicted of some sort of offense that involved sexual violence. Again, as I mentioned before, the criteria includes having some sort of a mental disorder that coordinates with that. The legal process for an SVP would be dependent on the area, it seems like, even though that's not really ideal. But different areas tend to treat people differently, at least in what I was reading. Here in the Central Valley, it's basically they have like a formal evaluation from a mental health professional, and then they go to trial. If they don't plead out, they go to trial, and a jury can decide if they meet the criteria for this particular designation. After they have been convicted, they go to prison, they serve out their sentence. Once that's happened, then most of the time they're committed to a state hospital for treatment. After that, this commitment time can really be infinity. My uncle works in a hospital like that up in Washington, and it's very similar rules and laws up there, and it's literally on an island. He has to take a ferry there every day. He's a security, like a correctional officer up there, where every single person there literally has antisocial personality disorder or some other violent sexual behavior. So these laws surrounding sexual violence came about because they didn't know what to do with these people, especially the repeat offenders. And the laws were created to give the public a greater sense of safety by taking these people out of the community. They're being seen as dangerous and unable to be rehabilitated. In the short term, and need structured treatment that is focused on reducing their likelihood of offending again, lowering their recidivism rates. But this is a really expensive program that we're finding. So with the indefinite placement in a hospital, it becomes kind of a discussion of who pays for that. So that's kind of been like this lingering argument in communities in California. What do we do with these people? How do we do it as cheaply as possible? Things like that. There's a lot of question behind whether or not it's even, punishment fits the crime situation. How do we know these people are not going to be rehabable sooner? Are we giving them too strict of a punishment? There's arguments on both sides. My personal opinion, I do think it's kind of a case-by-case basis. The placement of somebody for God only knows how long, it does allow for us to keep looking at risk factors and seeing when that person is no longer dangerous. But also, the studies I was reading, it's kind of hard to fully predict if that person is going to go out and commit more sexually violent crimes. So I'm not sure if the cost is worth it. However, I also don't know what else to do with these guys, so I do understand the point of the programs. If the treatment's in like a really secure, controlled environment, lots of empirical data supporting that it is actually working, showing that it's decreasing their risk of being violent sexually and providing a true opportunity for rehab, I think that it could potentially reduce the risk of reoffending, but in my learning at my work where I'm at, where we do work with some adolescent and adult offenders, along with some of the conferences and training I've attended, it just seems like the rates are still really not all that great, even with all this cost. But again, we go back to what should we do with these people. So I do have some concerns on top of that. Civil rights of these people, they are human beings still. So are we infringing on that by telling them, hey, you can't live your best life because you made a mistake? Or are we saying, hey, you know, this mistake is way too big and we can't take that risk as a community? So that's kind of a concern I have about not having this program. But also, the data is still kind of going both ways on whether or not this is effective. So worrying about, are we wasting our money and time? How do we really know it's working? Long-term studies are showing it's better than without, but it's not that great of an increase based on what I was reading. People that come out of this type of a thing, they haven't, it's kind of like being in jail long term, they haven't been out in society. So when they do re-enter into society, that's a high stress situation, and it seems like there needs to be a lot more support on reintegrating them into life, along with making sure they aren't offending again. Looking forward to your comments. Thanks so much for listening.